testing, just testing. You missed the mark in your response to the Mrs. in Orlando, whose husband wouldn't slow down. I've spent 34 years running after a husband who is in a hurry to get to the car, get up from the table, rush to the checkout counter, so forth, and I'm tired of it. Most of the time he has to wait until I get there anyway to leave or set out for wherever we're going. He simply doesn't see his actions as being inconsiderate. That poem, "Slow Me Down, Lord," was beautiful, but it was too long. A man in a hurry would never get past the second line. Tag along. Dear Tag Along, sorry, I received a lot of positive feedbacks on that poem. A rebuttal from a retired woman in Anaheim. Not all retirees continue the frantic pace of the Mrs. in Orlando. Some seniors have the opposite problem. We have trouble getting energized. For us, I paraphrase the Reverend Peterson's poem, "Slow Me Down, Lord," as follows. Speed me up, Lord. Start the pounding of my heart and concentration of my mind. Quicken my slow pace with a vision of my limited earthly time. Give me, amid the confusion of my day, the calm of self-chosen priorities. Break the spell of quietness. Let not soothing music or television keep me from activities. Help me to know when to wake up. When I've had sufficient sleep, tell me the art of channeling my energy so I get things done and still have time for flowers and friends, pets and children, smiles and books. Remind me each day that there is more to life than sitting around. Let me look upward into the branches of the towering oak and know that it is still producing. Speed me up, Lord, and inspire me to spend my strength wisely, remembering life's important values, that I may meet more challenges and fulfill a greater destiny. 84 in California. Ma, dear Abby, you credited "Slow Me Down, Lord" to the Reverend Wilfred A. Peterson. It seems to me that it was written by the late Cardinal Richard Cushing of Boston, who died in 1970. Could be mistaken. Dear Could Be, the poem was erroneously credited to the late Cardinal Cushing by others, not by the Cardinal himself, but it was in fact written by the Reverend Wilfred A. Peterson, who is well and alive at 85 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Dear Abby, I am assigned to a base in Japan and don't often get a chance to see my family. Last year, when I was back in the States, my father seemed a little more fragile than I had remembered him the previous year. Later, I took the advice I read in your column just before Father's Day. Write a letter to your father and tell him how you feel about him and why. Although I love both my parents very much, I didn't often say it. Dad died of cancer in January. His was a very brief illness, lasting only a few months from the time of diagnosis. At his funeral, I learned that the letter I wrote, which made me feel a little foolish for saying what was in my heart, had made the rounds of the family. He was proud of that letter and read it to anyone who would listen. He had even sent it to his sister 3 states away. Although I never heard it from him, I came to realize that my letter gave him much more pleasure than I thought it would. A wonderful person is now gone, and a big piece of my life is missing. But thanks to you, I feel that I completed the final segment of the circle. I thank you for being thoughtful enough to stress the importance of this final act of family love. It made his day, and it made mine. David Gibbs, Yokosuka, Japan. The little one on my lap. It was on a gray morning that my wife's parents drove my daughters back to our home. They had taken care of the girls during that long, discouraging week since my wife entered the hospital. As the kids hopped out of the car, I knew they would be full of questions and I would be low on answers. Tara, my oldest, was 3, and after reciting a litany of her events at Grandma's house, she asked me to read her a book. I was in the process of describing to my in-laws the details of my draining week, so I tried to postpone her plea. But she was persistent, succumbing to what I considered a frivolous break at the moment. I sighed. Okay, pick a book. To my surprise, she grabbed a volume of the encyclopedia and opened to the chapter entitled Rockets. She hopped up on my lap, placed the book on hers, and I began to read about Chinese festival rockets and Wernher von Braun. I abruptly stopped and asked her, Tara, do you understand this? She wiggled and giggled and said yes. Several paragraphs informed us of rockets of war and rockets to the stars, and again I asked, Tara, do you really know what this is about? She leaned back against my chest and chuckled. Yes, Daddy. One more page and we were into propulsion, G-force, and re-entry retrieval, and I was lost. In a voice without wisdom or perspective, I ask, Tara, do you have the vaguest idea what this means? She slowly turned, gave me a kiss, and confidently said, Yes, Daddy, I know what it means. It means you love me. And then I realized she knew exactly what it was all about. Rick Pacuconis. Dr. Wallace, I am aware that teen suicide is a serious problem in the United States. Is it because of our pressure to succeed attitude, or is teen suicide a world problem? I still don't understand why a teenager would be so depressed that he would take his own life. Jody, Florence, Alabama. Jody, according to psychologist Roger Breger, suicidal teens are not seeking to die, but are attempting to halt an intolerable pain from which they see no escape. The idea of suicide is viewed as the only solution, the best alternative. In Teen Age, a monthly magazine, teens in 59 countries were surveyed on various subjects. 17% of all the teens polled said they at one time or another considered suicide. 18% of the U.S. teens surveyed said they had considered taking their lives, so it appears teen suicide is indeed a world problem. Dr. Wallace, I am 14 and so is my best girlfriend. We are, or I should say were, very close until we both started liking the same boy. Well, it so happens that I liked Jimmy 2 days before Sylvia did, but Jimmy won't even talk to me. Instead, he is all goo-goo-eyed over Sylvia. I don't think this is fair, do you? What should I do about it? Jane, St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Jane, unfortunately, finding a boyfriend is not done by the finders keepers or first come, first served philosophies. Since Sylvia cares for Jimmy and he is goo-goo-eyed over her, you are odd woman out. But since there are many sharp young guys in St. Catharines, you shouldn't have any trouble finding someone else. Dr. Wallace, please help me. I'm in a situation and I don't know in which direction to turn. I am enrolled in a nearby university where I am a freshman. I met this wonderful young man there the first month of school. He is a sophomore. We have been seeing each other for 6 months now, and all is great. When we first met, he told me he had a girlfriend back home. She goes to college out of state somewhere, and he only sees her on major holidays. Dr. Wallace, I love him with all my heart, and he's always telling me how much he loves me. There's always this girlfriend thing hanging over my head, though. I try to cope, but it's difficult. We're not engaged in sex. I've told him how much I'm against premarital sex, and he respects my morals and has never pressured me. As I said before, I love him. What should I do? Nan, Clarksdale, Mississippi. Nan, since this boy confesses that he loves you, he should not have a girlfriend at home. This relationship is becoming much too deep for that sort of thing. Inform the boy that he has a choice, you or the girl back home. Make him aware that he can't have both. Question: what symptoms would lead a doctor to recommend a permanent pacemaker? Hugh, Birmingham, Alabama. Answer: pacemakers are implanted in patients with symptoms that are found to be related to some alteration in the rhythm of the heartbeat. The symptoms may include confusion, dizziness, seizure, and temporary blackouts. Question: a co-worker of mine was recently hospitalized, and talk around shop is that he has alcohol withdrawal syndrome. Can you tell me what causes it and what the signs are? Mrs. L.S., Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Answer: alcohol withdrawal syndrome occurs when a person stops consuming alcohol after having consumed it for a lengthy period of time. The syndrome is characterized by anxiety, agitation, and irritability. Hallucination and tremor, involuntary shaking may also be present. In addition, most patients experience abnormalities in blood pressure and heart rate. Question: I assume that if a condition can be treated without drugs, it would be better than treating it with drugs. I have a brother-in-law who is on medication for depression and think he would be better off without the pills. Would you agree? Mr. S.M., Montgomery, Alabama. Some depression patients can be helped through non-pharmacologic means, but this is not true of everyone. Moreover, even depressed patients who do not need medication will not all respond to the same kind of non-drug therapy. Finally, there are some patients for whom drug therapy is essential. As I have previously noted in this column, some depressed patients respond to the beneficial effects of light, while others are helped by running or by some other form of exercise. Whether your brother-in-law falls in either category must be determined by his physician. When my husband was a young Air Force officer, we were reassigned to a base thousands of miles from our families. We arrived several weeks before the birth of our second child and rented a furnished apartment while waiting for base quarters. I desperately wanted to feather my new nest before the baby came, but he was born at 3 a.m. on moving day. Instead of the chaos I'd feared, however, my homecoming was beautiful. Fellow officers and their wives had pitched in to help my husband. They took turns caring for our 2-year-old child. They unpacked, washed all of the boxed up dishes, and put everything away. They even laundered all of the linens. A new neighbor brought over a home-fried chicken dinner for our first meal together in our new home. As she set the food down, she mentioned that they were about to be transferred. But how can I ever repay you? I asked in dismay. Don't worry, she answered. I've already been repaid by others. Just pass it on to someone else sometime. 20 years and many moves later, I've come to understand that this is the way of life in the surface. Don't worry about repaying, just pass it on. Jill Pontius. Signs of the times. On the door of a gym in Pensacola, Florida, watch your figure. A waist is a terrible thing to mind. From a church bulletin, the Lord loveth a cheerful giver. He also accepteth from a grouch. In a barber shop, you grow it, we mow it. At a garden store, give a weed an inch and it'll take a yard. In a real estate office window in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, come in and have plot luck with us. On a fire station in Wildwood Crest, New Jersey, if you come to our dance, we'll go to your fire. A doting father used to sing his little children to sleep until he overheard the 4-year-old tell the 3-year-old, if you pretend you're asleep, he stops. Father's Day, Sunday, June the 15th, 1986. Oh, you who take care of the sparrow without requiring of it to be like you, you who tenderly take care of the sparrow by putting yourself in its place with fatherly solicitude, you also take good care of us. And even if you require of us an effort in your image that you cannot require of the sparrow, it is without cruelty that you require it of us. No, but like a solicitous Father, you put yourself in our place, and it is you who give us the strength to strive. Soren Kierkegaard. Monday, June the 16th. That I did always love, I bring thee proof, that till I loved, I never lived enough. That I shall love always, I argue thee, that love is life, and life has immortality. Emily Dickinson. Tuesday, June the 17th. Little children, let us love in deed and truth, and not merely talk about it. This is our way of knowing we are committed to the truth and are at peace before Him, no matter what our consciences may charge us with. For God is greater than our hearts, and all is known to Him. 1 John 3:18-20. I mentioned to a friend that with hopes of getting our garden in shape, I was going to buy my husband a rototiller for Father's Day. That's nice, she said without enthusiasm. I got one for Mother's Day. Would you order a chicken sandwich if you knew it contained as much fat as a pint and a half of ice cream does? Probably not. Most Americans are health conscious. Increasingly, we pass up red meat, high in saturated fats, in favor of low-fat chicken and fish. We use margarine instead of butter, and we fry food in polyunsaturated vegetable oil. We also eat more fast food than ever. Over 45 million people, a fifth of the population, are now served at fast food restaurants on a typical day. To accommodate the changing tastes of all these people, fast food chains have provided us with chicken nuggets and fish sandwiches. We munch them blissfully, assuming that we have chosen a healthful, low-fat meal. Don't count on it. The chicken and fish are usually cooked in beef tallow, fat that is trimmed from meat cuts and rendered into shortening. Tallow is not only fat, but one of the worst kinds of fat. It is relatively high in saturated fatty acids, which means it has a tendency to raise cholesterol levels in the blood. The Center for Science in the Public Interest, a consumer group based in Washington, D.C., created shockwaves recently when it had fast food French fries tested by Dr. Frank Sachs, an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. He found that the nation's largest fast food chains, including McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Arby's, Hardee's, and Popeyes, were frying their potatoes in fat, consisting mainly of beef tallow. In a follow-up study, Commissioner by Science Digest, Dr. Sachs, showed that the fatty acids profiles of McDonald's chicken McNuggets and filet of fish resembled beef more than they did chicken or fish. And according to the industry's own figures, Burger King's chicken sandwich contains 42 grams of fat, equivalent to the fat in a pint and a half of ice cream. About 30% of the fat in McDonald's chicken McNuggets and over 40% of that in the filet of fish is saturated. Quite simply, says Dr. Sachs, the favorable fatty acid content of chicken and fish is overwhelmed by cooking them in beef tallow. Adds Bonnie Liebman, Director of Nutrition for CSPI. More often than not, the fast food places take basically good food and turn it into bad. As an immediate result of CSPI's investigation, more than 100 scientists and deans of leading medical and public health schools representing such institutions as Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons and the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston signed a petition urging the change to stop frying foods in heavily saturated fats, to offer a greater selection of low-fat baked or broiled items, and to start labeling their product ingredients. Burger King has recently switched to 100% vegetable oil for all fried items except French fries. I was astonished that in this day and age, given our health consciousness, restaurants would use beef tallow, says Dr. Daniel Levy, director of the Cardiovascular Laboratory at the Framingham Heart Study in Massachusetts. It's a poor choice. If they would change their means of preparing food, we could save thousands of lives each year. For many, fast foods are a way of life and death. The key word is saturated fat, which is known to raise cholesterol levels in some individuals. Diets rich in cholesterol and animal fats have been linked with coronary heart disease, the country's biggest killer, and the atherosclerosis, the condition in which cholesterol and other deposits in our arteries narrow the channels through which blood flows. According to the American Heart Association, heart and blood vessel disease claims 1 million lives a year in this country. Autopsies have shown that atherosclerosis Solosius starts early. In one study, 46% of American men ages 18 to 24 already had the beginnings of the disease, according to Tazewell Banks, director of the Heart Station at the District of Columbia General Hospital. Children who are major consumers of fast food may be susceptible to the first stages of atherosclerosis from the age of 2 onward. If you love your kids, says Banks, don't send them to those fast food places. The average American currently gets about 15% of his calories from saturated fats. The National Institutes of Health wants that figure to drop below 10%. Others argue that the body has no special requirements for any saturated fat. If it were possible, I'd like to see the saturated fat reduced to 3%, says Dr. Sachs, or better, to 0. That goal is far out of reach. In 1984, 1 4/10 billion pounds of eatable beef tallow were used in the United States, most for frying, some in margarines. Its cooking advantages are simply put. Tallow is relatively inexpensive. It doesn't break down at high temperatures as unsaturated vegetable oils do, and it is flavorful, says Terry Capitoso, a spokesperson for McDonald's. The reason we use a combination of vegetable and beef shortening is because it produces the consistency and tastes our customers expect. Such selling points appear to be outweighed, however, by the concern that beef tallow may raise cholesterol levels in the blood and so contribute to heart and blood vessel disease. Scientists disagree on precisely what different fats do to the body. Some studies show that polyunsaturated fats, such as those in safflower oil, decrease the body's tendency to manufacture cholesterol and, up to a point, increase the rate of breakdown and excretion of cholesterol. Other studies suggest that olive oil, high in monounsaturated fats, also lowers blood cholesterol levels. Fats in any form, however, is still fat, and nutritionists have long cautioned against too much of it in the diet. Lower your total fat intake, period, says Dr. William Castella, medical director of the Framingham Heart Study. The NIH and other agencies recommend a 25% cutback in all dietary fat, with the average person consuming about 89 grams of fat a day. According to CSPI, that would mean a reduction to about 67 grams. Some fast food restaurants have 67 grams of fat in just one meal, notes CSPI's Lieberman. You start with the hamburgers, which have a fat as they are. Then cheese is put on, adding still more fat. Then you get double burgers and double cheeseburgers, along with sauces, which are sometimes made of mayonnaise. Indeed, according to figures from both CSPI and McDonald's, a packet of French fries contain 11 5/10 grams of fat, 1/6 the maximum daily intake recommended by CSPI, and more than is contained in a hamburger. While a 10 3/4 ounce chocolate shake has 9 grams, a Big Mac has about 34. At Burger King, a double Whopper with cheese has a hefty 70 grams all by itself. The National Cancer Institute also recommends lowering total intake of dietary fat. This follows studies suggesting that people in countries such as Japan with traditionally low-fat diets seem to be at lower risk for certain types of cancer, breast, prostate, colon, and pancreatic, than do those on a typical Western diet. In the face of such advice and such warnings, the big chains continue to serve beef fried foods, and all are advertising heavily. Perhaps the most memorable of the TV commercials was the one for Wendy's, in which the chain's former star, Clara Peller, peeked into a giant-sized, scantily filled bun and complained loudly, "Where's the beef?" As we all know now, it's in the burgers and in the chicken, fish, and French fries as well. Mary Ann Bird, condensed from Guidepost magazine. I grew up knowing I was different, and I hated it. I was born with a cleft palate, and when I started school, my classmates made it clear to me how I must look to others. A little girl with a misshaped lip, crooked nose, lopsided teeth, and garbled speech. When schoolmates would ask, "What happened to your lip?" I'd tell them I'd fallen and cut it on a piece of glass. Somehow it seemed more acceptable to have suffered an accident than to have been born different. I was convinced that no one outside my family could love me or even like me. Then I entered Mrs. Leonard's second grade class. Mrs. Leonard was round and pretty and fragrant, with shining brown hair and warm, dark, smiling eyes. Everyone adored her, but no one came to love her more than I did, and for a special reason. The time came for the annual hearing tests given at our school. I could barely hear out of one ear and was not about to reveal something else that would single me out as different, so I cheated. The whisper test required each child to go to the classroom door, turn sideways, close one ear with a finger while the teacher whispered something from her desk, which the child repeated. Then the same for the other ear. Nobody checked how tightly the untested ear was covered, so I merely pretended to block mine. As usual, I was last, but all through the testing, I wondered what Mrs. Leonard might say to me. I knew from previous years that the teacher whispered things like, "The sky is blue," or "Do you have new shoes?" My time came. I turned my bad ear toward her, plugging up the other just enough to be able to hear. I waited, and then came the words that God had surely put into her mouth. 7 words that changed my life forever. Mrs. Leonard, the teacher I adored, said softly, "I wish you were my little girl."